a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Australia's best independent news and opinion radio show, The Daily Australian, with Nicola Charles and Jason Olbourne.
Hey, well, that is us. We are back, The Daily Australian, for Monday, June the 16th. This is episode 112. And I don't know about you watching, but a little bit confused, a little bit frustrated, and just wondering how soon it will be before easier decisions have to be made. Not just about what we have to do on a daily basis, but whether or not we can believe in the system, break the system, work on a new system, or wonder if anyone is there going to lead us out of the quagmire we face ourselves in. Nicola Charles, welcome back. Happy Monday. What's going on? Goodness me. How do you feel after the weekend?
Well, I feel better because I did a lot less. I'm frustrated because you guys, the audience, are not sharing us enough. Sorry to be so harsh about that, but it's true because we're trying to beat algorithms here. And in a moment, I'm going to have another pop at AI. But to beat these algorithms, you have to share us. Now, I know that lots of you share us, and I've actually seen it myself when I share this show, particularly on X, which is a bit disappointing, where if we're on sort of 7 retweets and I share it and it goes up to 8, I actually then watch it go back down to 7, like it hasn't registered. So I know that a lot of you are sharing it and then it's not showing that it's shared, and I understand how frustrating that is. But we need to do better, because we're in this technological war and they've got all the weapons, they've got all the technology, and all we have is us asking you to do us a good serve and share it. So try harder, because if we can't get out there, if we can't reach people, then this show may end. This show might not have as much legs and longevity as we would like. So help us out. It doesn't cost you anything to share. It's not a subscription or anything like that. So please, if you want us to keep chatting about this stuff, do us a good turn. Thank you very much. Ta in advance.
Well, I can't complain about that one. It is difficult to be able to get it out there, and I don't know what it takes to share it. If you don't like it, write a comment and say not worthy of sharing, and then we'll work out what we're going to do. But I ask my friends the same thing, just share it for me. And or they put a like and don't share, or they argue that no one sees it on their page. But well, no one sees it if you don't share it. So at least you're on a hiding to nothing. There's nothing in that as well. Look, I did an interview last week, and it was a good one, and I boosted it on X. And the process of boosting it just means that you literally pay a small amount of money to sort of push through the algorithm, which I thought was a good test of things, and I had some bit of success with it, and one of the big successes off a boost was that Darren Hinch responded. I ended up getting an interview with Darren Hinch off that. Wouldn't have got that had I not boosted a particular interview. Anyway, the interview that I did that I boosted has vanished off my page, Elon Musk, on X, and I cannot find it. I found it on another page that it was also streamed to, but not my page, not there at all. And I don't know why it was removed. I can't quite work out why that was the case if it hasn't been removed elsewhere. And of course, there was nothing in there that would be removable according to any of X's sort of terms and conditions. So I can't explain that, but very disappointing that was the case, particularly after I spent money going to that company to use their services to then, take it down or remove it. It's kind of odd. So yeah, I did find it frustrating at the same time. Now, having said all of that, like, am I I think I'm the invisible man. I mean, it's ridiculous. Less people see me now than they did 5 years ago.
You've upset someone, honey. You've upset someone. It's obvious.
There it is.
That post that you couldn't see, I could see on your page. And the bit where it says retweet it had shadow across it. You know when some people do that? Bill Gates does that. If you're not one of his mates, you can't share it, you can't retweet it. It was shadowed. So it was there, but it basically had no things at the bottom. So I was like, why would you do that? Why would you choose to do that? Because it wasn't even about, the old. So it didn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Well, must be doing something right at the same time, because in August of 2023, I interviewed Professor Retzit Levy on my World Series News show. Now, what's interesting about this person is that RFK has named a new slate of vaccine advisors after purging the CDC panel, one of whom is Professor Retzit Levy, which is pretty cool. It's the time for science, not ideology. And this is an article that Marianne DeMasi just shared, I think only yesterday or maybe a couple of days ago on her Substack. In a little while, I'll play you a clip from Professor Retzit Levy, who just a small excerpt. We did, I think, 15 minutes on that particular day. And I might repost that on X and other social medias a bit later. But very interesting interview that this guy has now been picked up as part of the panel. Also, what was interesting that I read over the weekend was that Raphael Latasta, the Sydney-based PhD ex-pharmacist who was picked up by Dr. Robert Malone and taken to the US to appear before the US Senate inquiry on COVID vaccines. So he came out in support, obviously, of Dr. Malone also being on that CDC panel, whilst there are others, former Trump administrator, Dr. Paul Alexander, who's always been anti-Malone. The interesting part is the panel better for having Malone on it or the previous people on it on the CDC that RFK sacked? And if, in fact, this man was pro-mRNA, given the fact that he was involved in the invention of this technology, just like we talked about Dr. Kerry Mullis being the inventor of PCR tests, is he better off being on it, knowing what he knows, or not being on it and not having a position of power? Now, later in the show today, I'm going to play a clip from Mike Pompeo. And what's interesting is Pompeo was the Secretary of State for Donald Trump, who's also a former CIA director, but Trump didn't want him back in this administration because many people felt that he was a bit of a white ant, a termite. And of course, he was one of these people that supported, getting rid of Julian Assange. But Pompeo comes out in support of Trump's actions, or support, I should say, in terms of Israel, just in the position and the stance there. So the question is, has Trump retreated, or has Pompeo got support? That's an argument or a debate that we can have, because this goes against what, say, Senator Jared Rennick has said at the weekend about the conflict with Israel, for example. So we'll present all of these different perspectives to you, and we can argue the way out of it. I think it's very interesting. And Michael Flynn has also, General Michael Flynn has also chimed in there with his thoughts as well on the situation with Iran.
We are going to disagree, so that's going to be an interesting chat. So you need to hang around for that, because I think we are going to disagree about it. Excuse me. Now, I just want to make something. I know, I do apologize, getting over the flu. I just want to make something very, very clear. It is becoming very clear to me that the release of AI onto society is being used as a weapon. And I really believe it's being used as a weapon, because if any human being undertook some of the things that AI is undertaking, the stalking of us, the reading of our private emails and messaging, the tracking and tracing, the collecting and storing of data, all that stuff. If any of us did that, we would be had up in court for stalking and harassment. There's absolutely no way that we wouldn't be. What's happening with me is that I'm getting comments now under my posts from accounts that don't have any followers, they don't have any pictures. They're clearly AI. And the comments are all very similar. So essentially they're saying, well, that's not what you said to me last week privately. That's not what you said to me last week privately. So I believe AI has been released onto us because they're far ahead of us technologically than we know. And even Trump said, we have weapons you can't even imagine. These are part of the weapons. I'm sorry. It's just a cold, hard truth. Right. So what they're doing, this is CCP style, because the way you take someone down is you damage their integrity. Right. You damage their integrity and their reputation. And that's what they're seeking to do. And these things have been released onto the general public to learn. It's in a learning phase. And so people, even we've done it, help with the resume, create a piece of art of a futuristic car, all this fun stuff. So we interact with it. Why? I believe AI is looking for human weakness. And our weakness in the eyes of these self-professed elites and AI is that we have compassion, we have empathy, we have our humanity, because they don't care about that stuff. So AI is in this learning phase regarding humanity, where it's taking all that data in and it's learning how to use it against us. And it's a very dangerous thing. And I think all of us need to be wary of AI. AI is not our friend. AI is there to collect information about us, not information just what are you saying in text messages and stuff, information about how you feel as a human being and how you react to propaganda and news and stories about war and a possible another vaccine rollout, right? So buyer beware. Instead of every time someone says anything on social media, you say, oh, let me ask Grok. Why? Why? Where are all the encyclopedias? Where's the truth? Where's your own sort of experiences on that? So I think we need to be very, very careful, because if humans behave the way AI is behaving, we'd be charged, we'd be locked up. But apparently for AI, it's absolutely fine, which means it's a weapon. So be careful.
When you use Grok for any reason, so for example, you might just type in as an experiment, write a bio on Jason Olbourne. That's a easy question, right? So see how if it can write a bio quicker than I can write my own bio. And what it does is it consults 25 sources, and out of that instantaneously is able to compile a bio, and you can ask for even to be limited to a number of words. And it's interesting because it consults, what it would perceive to be the most popular sources. So if there's something that's missing, for example, that comes from a different source, you can then say, well, you've missed this particular source, and it will go on, it will provide a perspective on that compared to what you've already written, which is some of the interesting things that I've used just to sort of check out to see how it actually thinks. So therefore, one wonders that he who controls said AI development is the master manipulator in all of this. But at the same time, if you can direct it, it's not restricted to that. It's just that if it's programmed to take 25 sources, why isn't it programmed to take 125 sources or an unlimited amount of sources, and then to determine or present opposing views, for example? But
Which
then
it could.
But one might argue that the first 99 sources all say this, and one source says the opposite. So therefore, we're going to, say that that's a negligible source and remove it. So therefore, there is an argument. So it's always going to be weighted, isn't it? So it becomes a weighting as opposed to a fact or an opinion as such. So it can't necessarily be the truth of the matter. What's interesting
it's programmed as to which bits to take. What's that famous Nancy Pelosi clip where she says there's a process, I forget what she called it, where they essentially create a proof of concept, a rumor, so-and-so is going to be charged with something, normally Trump. Then it goes into the press, and then it becomes something that AI can retrieve. Trump's been charged with or suspected of XYZ. They can create anything on any of us and destroy our reputation.
Absolutely. Well, we tested that in real time last week with an actual quote from Nancy Pelosi, which we then presented actual refutable evidence from the chief of police from the US Capitol in Stephen Sund. And somebody got on to that particular interview on X and challenged it, asking Grok, to which Grok came and supported Pelosi, but then said, but Stephen Sund claimed this. Well, it didn't just claim it, it's been proven, but therefore it's a process of what sources it therefore takes. So therefore there is a role for media, there is a role for information, there is a role for human beings to be able to resist or point out the problems in the system. It just means that there's more work to be done rather than the system simplifying what's really going on there. But we have that on the show from last week that we discussed in great detail and presented firsthand, first source, primary source there, my interview with Stephen Sund, to say that twice he asked for a National Guard relief on January the 3rd and was twice rejected. For Nancy Pelosi to come out and say that we begged the president for National Guard and he rejected it, which is an absolute fizzer, because Stephen Sund has to report directly to the appointed person of Nancy Pelosi, the Sergeant-at-Arms, for approval, and twice was rejected. And we proved that on this show. So there aren't any other news shows out there anywhere that I can recall that was able to present that information the way that we did there. And we'll have other ones ongoing, of course, with said information. But there you go.
It's definitely told to, I think, give Democrats, maybe across the slather, Democrats a free pass, a free hall pass, right? Whatever they say is the truth, even though we know it's not. and whatever Republicans say or conservatives or, anyone that does a podcast, like the White Rabbit or your show, that they're not to be believed, that they're to be considered conspiracy theories. And it often says that. People have asked it about me before, and it says, because she was an actress, she's very good at talking to people and getting her opinions across, probably because she's an actress, but she is a known conspiracy theorist. So tell me what I've theorized on, which conspiracy that isn't true. Would that be about the chemtrails? Would that be about the small print in the Voice to Parliament referendum? Tell me about anything I've talked about that's turned out to be a big fat whopper. I mean, the only thing that could be considered a conspiracy theory, which is not, it's a hypothesis by someone who's looked at the data, is when I interviewed John Cullen about meteors coming to Earth. But that's because he's talking about actual real data anyway and real findings and presents photographs. So it's a little bit worrying. What we're trying to do here, particularly with AI and also all the censorship and everything, and this is definitely what's happening with you, is we're trying to create a world where, the brain stops working. What is it? They call it necrosis of intellect. Because people are going to stop doing things. I saw an interview with a South African law professor only because he was running for office in the last election. And he was saying that some of his law students are just not doing their thesis. They're just going to AI. And he's failing them and getting very cross with them, because what we're going to have is we're going to have lawyers rocking up in court, and they're going to be presenting the same argument that they've all pulled from AI. And I don't want a world run with AI that is clearly biased. It is clearly biased. Although I did hear a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that we're all worried about Palantir, and I'm still looking at Palantir, but apparently Palantir is now in the hands of the good guys, and I don't know, excuse me, who considers the Trump administration good or not. But apparently that's been taken out of the hands of the enemy. I don't know. I'd like to see proof on that.
Well, okay, this is a thing I don't understand. If there was no Donald Trump, let's say he doesn't run in 2016 and Hillary Clinton got in, or let's say he was taken out in July of last year, where would we be today if Kamala Harris was president, Hillary Clinton had done 8 years? Well, that probably meant Joe Biden wouldn't have been president if Hillary had got in. But where would we be? Palantir would be in the hands of the deep state. AI would be in the hands of the deep state. Hillary would have no doubt started a bigger war with Russia, because that was the NATO scenario, that they wanted to get that power. And China would have got away with COVID completely. And we'd probably be up to our third pandemic by now, and these rolling sets of pandemics to forcibly vaccinate us. The UN would have more. Yeah, the UN would have more power. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend holds each and every time. The weird thing is now that the situation with Israel and Iran has brought out so many different perspectives, but generally it always falls down to Israel bad no matter what. And so that's where the rise of, anti-Semitism accusations come from. Because at the end of the day, every single organization on earth has bad people in it. Jewish organizations or at the high end in politics, American, Iranian, Muslim, Christian, it's bad everywhere. I remember in business, whenever someone told me in advance without any solicitation that they were a Christian, I always used to take that and go, no, I know I'm about to get ripped off. And I know that's a horrible generalization, but it happened to me 3 out of 3 times that somebody introduced themselves to me and then said without solicitation that they were a Christian. And it always justified that they wouldn't pay me.
Oh my God.
I got smarter at it and made sure later on that when that happened and I had to put up with it, I would get paid. But on the final occasion it came up, I just said, sorry, I can't. I'm just not going to do. I just walked out. I'm not doing business with these people. But that's an example. And that's not to say that Christian people are bad. It's not. I'm just saying that in all organizations, in all people, there are good and bad everywhere. But to just say that, that someone is bad is a nonsense. Now, I happened to watch a fellow called the Traveling Clat This fellow from the Middle East has 450,000 followers on YouTube, and he has these debates with people between Israel and Palestine. So he was brought up 3 generations of, he explains, as Arab abuse. So he's a Jewish person, and he argues or debates with people about Palestine's right to exist, etc. And the arguments are quite thin from people supporting Palestine, because he's asking from a perspective of, cultural identity, where these people came from, what it is that they actually bring, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea being nomadic is not the same as being connected to a place. That's the whole problem we have with, the right here in Australia for so many years before the Mabo case was the identification of actual land, and it was marked by rocks that marked out a space of land, and that's where the Mabo case comes from, to prove that that they were connected to this piece of land. So if you're just wandering, you can't be. So anyway, he argues these cases, and when you then see how this fellow debates, these people become and agree with him, or they disconnect and run, or whatever it is. So others will argue that that Israel is a creation of Rothschild from 1948, and that's the end of the argument, which is also a bit of a nonsense, because this history goes back thousands of years. But
all of our history goes back thousands of years. This is what annoys me about Australian heritage laws. I feel like walking into Toorak with my own one-woman protest and screaming, "Hang on, my white European ancestors built these mud huts in Toorak. All this land is mine. Get out." Because that's essentially what we're saying with heritage laws in Australia. My ancestors built this. Get out. This was a hut. This was a mining town. Now, with regard to Israel, you've really set me off now. I've watched this morning clips from Netanyahu historically. I don't like him. It doesn't have anything to do with Jewish people. I don't like him. Plenty of Jewish people don't like him either. Where he's talking about the Twin Towers are going to come down. The Twin Towers. And he also references in the clip, I've got it, after 9/11, the bombs. When the bombs went off in the Twin Towers, what were you talking about? He also said, there were weapons of mass destruction, 100% guaranteed in Iraq. And if we don't take down Saddam Hussein, they're going to launch them around the world. And he said 100% without question, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And now he's going in as the arbiter of democracy in Iran. Now, I don't like what's going on either side. I think it's disgusting. I don't like conflict. But pundits are saying this morning out of America that they've got evidence that the targets that Israel hit, because Israel are now saying, oh my God, Iran is targeting civilians and it's so wrong. And of course it is. But apparently Israel were targeting data centers in Iran, because apparently these data centers, apparently Iran hacked Israel's intelligence. Now, you wouldn't imagine, the home of Palantir, you wouldn't imagine that's possible. Pundits are now saying it's going to break in the next 24 hours that Iran hacked Israel's intelligence centers, and that they have all the intelligence on Israel's involvement in 9/11 and everything else Netanyahu has spoken about. Now, if that's the case, if that's true and that breaks in the next few days, that's going to be absolutely huge. And I'm just wondering if that's why the Trump administration won't take that next step in support. Something very bad is coming. We're being distracted by so much. But if we really knew the information, the truth of the information that is held in these AI data centers, I think our heads would spin around. So I'm going to be watching that like a hawk, because this is what the future will be about. This is why Trump wants that dome in America over where they're going to put their massive data centers, because of course they're going to become the new target, not military bases, not a few tanks and aircraft. That's old hot war. The new hot war, the future hot war, like we started talking about AI at the beginning, is the information they hold on each other. And we know that information they hold on each other, Jason, could mean they're controlling monarchy, they're controlling politicians and governments. This is the new gold. This is the new oil, is all of this data. So if Iran really does have data on Israel, that would explain why they're an enemy, right?
Well, it would be one reason why they're an enemy. There of course, are other enemies, such as Iran threatening the existence of Israel from the outset, from the Ayatollah that's been in power for 30 years. Well, you can't. I mean, all threats are just words, but death threats are death threats. But it
Well,
doesn't
our
mean.
governments have essentially threatened us with mandates and vaccines and all that kind of stuff. And that wasn't just words. That was actually legislated for. That was actually put in writing. You know, there's words. There's words. Peoples are going to hate each other all over the world. That's the way it's always been. But you can't go to war surely based on what people are saying. Where's the evidence? We never get the evidence. We never got any evidence against Saddam Hussein, and yet we all watched him hung on international television. So I'm really concerned. We don't have a clue what's going on, and it's absolutely not about what we think it's about.
Well, the Ayatollah's been in power since before 2001, so the threats are coming before. Having said that, the some things about September 11 that we may just worth refreshing on was that there was lots of documentaries and support and evidence saying that Mossad was involved, and the thermite and the installations, etc., and the cut downs and the links to what was his name, the owner of the World Trade Centers, and getting the not one but two claims when the buildings were destroyed.
The guys in the Ute.
Frank Lowy, the owner of Westfield at the time, had only just bought into to have the shopping centre at the bottom of the World Trade Centre. It was an interesting lease development. He was going to lease part of that out to build the Westfields in there, which would have been a flagship for that particular shopping centre company. Of course, Donald Trump was the first one out of the gates after 9/11 to say that what they were saying didn't add up. He was very sceptical from the outset, within minutes of it happening. And of course, Howard Lutnick, who is one of his secretaries in the administration in business, was the chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, the company that was the worst hit on the day. Some 648 employees, including his brother, were killed that day. And the only reason that Howard Lutnick was not there was that he was taking his young boy to his first day of kindergarten on that particular day. And just as luck would have it, despite people saying that he was warned, and there were plenty of people that weren't there on the morning of, so when Giuliani came out on the morning of 9/11 after the attacks, he estimated that as many as 50,000 people could have been killed in that. But of course, it was 2,300 odd, which indicated that for some that people had been warned, which there was definitely those situations, and stock market trades, etc., give way to that. However, what people don't remember in New York is that whilst it's the city that never sleeps and people work very late and stay out very late in New York, certainly back then they did, they also don't necessarily start work early. A lot of people used to start work at 10 o'clock in the morning, and these attacks hit at, I think, 8:46 or something like that in the morning. So they hadn't yet got to work. That's part of the difference. It's just an odd thing in America. I remember going there in the 90s thinking that things started later than I expected, but they certainly went all night. That was the reason why. Not like here in Australia where, everyone's at work by 9 o'clock, or at least they used to be at that time. So that was interesting as well. So there's a lot of stories coming out about the involvement, and of course we've all been concerned about Mossad's involvement. Epstein, clearly, a CIA/Mossad agent, the owner of Victoria's Basement, again another name connected to Victoria's Basement, Victoria's Secret. Beg your pardon.
Victoria's Basement sounds a bit seedy. Yeah. Someone actually sent me a picture from Israel of Jeffrey Epstein alive getting out of a car.
Yeah, of course. The problem with those videos, of course, is that how do you prove the date stamps on them, the time stamps? I know I've seen some of those things, that their aerial view I saw after that had happened. So look, there are people that are arguing that Epstein's still alive. We saw pictures from an autopsy, but that autopsy was inconclusive in the fact that it could have been somebody else's body, and we knew that there was one man that was took his own life by hanging shortly before, Anthony Bourdain. That was a suicide by hanging. Who knows that and people were saying that it might have been him. Others were saying it was Tony Rodham, Hillary Clinton's brother, who passed away 2 months prior, around about the same age. Certainly he was a heavier man than Epstein, but he certainly could have lost weight. No one had seen him for years. But his facial features were very similar to Epstein's. There was no cause of death ever released, and there was no funeral for Tony Rodham. So, this just feeds the fire. Then there was this anonymous post that came out from somebody that was within, that timestamp matched the scenario, saying that it appeared that he'd been switched out at that point. So we don't know, and this is the point. And then you've got the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, hotel and Dan Bongino saying Epstein definitely killed himself, but they're only relying on, reports that they've read. And so here's the problem that we have is if you are in a position of power and authority and you are able to write a report that then goes up the chain to somebody else in power, they can only believe what's in the report. They're never going to question what's in the report. That's the point of the chain of command.
Fact, didn't they? They came in after the fact. This all happened with a different administration, right? So you come in after the fact. You just don't know how those facts have been altered or changed or misrepresented because they're so good at that. These are the intelligence services, Jason. They're good at what they do.
Therefore, that is right. So, therefore, any suggestion that Iran, for example, may be holding evidence that they hacked from Israel, of course, it gets people's attention, whether or not that's real or whether or not they're fighting for sympathy. Again, it's the art of war, isn't it? And the fog of war in what we're seeing. So. Is Iran's regime the bad guys or Iran's people? I mean, even Netanyahu came out and said,
No, I've got Iranian friends in Australia and they don't like their supreme leader, saying that they don't want to be bombed by Israel and they don't want Israel to be the people to remove their regime, and they don't understand why they think they can be the people to remove it, because obviously they don't know what's going on there in Australia. But there is a video, I've seen a video and it looks real, of people hanging out of tower blocks in Iran screaming, down with our leadership, right? They've caused this. And the reason my Iranian friends, they're in restaurants now, came to Australia is because of those leaders, because they were taking the country down a very dark path. Saying that, it doesn't explain Israel's involvement for me, not based on words.
So obviously, the argument there being more than words, whether or not they were expected to show the intelligence agencies saying, well, this is how much enriched uranium, etc. But they were obviously in part of the negotiation. Trump has come out and
Gabbard just said they didn't have any, Jason. There's a clip of Tulsi Gabbard saying we didn't find anything in Iran. A recent clip saying we didn't find anything enriched in Iran, which is really odd. That's also going around social media.
Okay, so Trump's saying here we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the nuclear issue. My entire administration was directed to negotiate with Iran. This could be a great country, but they first must give up hopes of obtaining a nuclear weapon. So this keeps coming back over and over again.
Well, he's putting it in the psyche, Jason. Twice he mentioned it, nuclear weapon, nuclear weapon. Of course, so we think it's about nuclear weapons. Why did Tulsi Gabbard, who works for him, recently say in a clip, there is no nuclear enrichment? And now suddenly we've done a pivot because Israel wants to invade or strike. It's not what we're being told. And I know this is a news show, but, we have to stop judging everything based on tweets and based on propaganda put out by governments, because we don't know that that's the truth. It is not making sense. Everything Netanyahu has said in the past wasn't true. Let's just base our opinions on that. The guy can't be relied upon to tell the truth if his mouth is moving. So that's very suspicious. Not reflecting on Israeli people or Jews around the world, not reflecting on Iranian people around the world. My Iranian friends are the gentlest people you'll ever meet. Bloody good cooks as well, by the way. I don't like these power plays between so-called governments, and they've got these dangerous weapons. And I'm telling you now, AI, intelligence, and data is the most dangerous weapon they've got. And that's why we keep being told about nukes. Yeah? Because when we think about nukes, we're like, oh my God, the whole world's going to get nuked. Tulsi Gabbard put out that terrible fear porn last week. This is what nuclear annihilation looks like. So she did that after she sat down in front of a panel and said, we've got no evidence that they've been enriching uranium. And then she comes out and does that nuclear thing. Something else is going on. Sorry to be so suspicious, but it's a big rabbit hole.
That's the point. That's the whole point of the discussion. I mean, there is the same story about saving Israel for last, and people can't work out what that means. No one's ever been able to work out what that means. Absolute 1776, and it bugs me that everyone's a character in a play here. And these are these articles, etc., that we follow along. There's clandestine, and then there's amuse, and they tend to be more right than wrong. He writes, all of Iran's biggest threats to the US, including undoubtedly the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the IRGC, top military leaders and top nuclear scientists, just got taken out. Not to mention one of Israel's biggest nuke production facilities was also taken out in return. So how exactly is any of the above bad for the United States? But people say POTUS didn't know, which was whatever. Remember the time that the Israeli government and Mossad used blackmail to control our government for decades, and by proxy our military, and by doing so used our military to police their enemies in that part of the globe. Think mirror. Israel is now being used to take out a legitimate threat to the West. I mean, come on, he writes. If in fact Iran was close to possessing nuclear weapons, there is a less than 0% chance that we could have handled it ourselves because of the optics. Not to mention there's only about a 1% chance that Iran would actually have abided to any diplomatic agreement which was struck. So the POTUS literally said the night beforehand that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuke, period. And then when asked what was going to happen, he said, you'll have to wait and see. Added to which we were warned our allies and began evacuating our personnel 24 hours beforehand. At least and lest we forget, POTUS told us that he knew when the attacks would happen, while also saying he gave Iran 60 days, and today was day 61. So just bear with me a sec. So, yeah, save me the narrative that he didn't know or that Bibi blindsided him. Some folks in this movement really need to set aside their hatred for a certain sect of people and utilize logic. Okay, here we go. Israel full ass. The optics are absolutely terrible for the Israeli government IDF, while at the same time striking a serious blow to an enemy of the United States. As truthers, we cannot ignore Occam's razor. Look back at the last few years and honestly ask yourself what simple answer makes sense in accordance with all the crazy stuff which we've seen has served no purpose other than to publicly out and destroy the cabal. Beyond that, if the cabal possessed the control, many still believe they do, then how did Trump win the election? From where I sit, the simplest conclusion is that the good guys possess a lot more control than people's cognitive dissonance is comfortable with admitting. That doesn't mean the events aren't real. It doesn't mean real lives are not being dramatically altered or lost. It does mean that the enemy has been boxed into a position that they cannot escape from. How easy it is to forget we're all involved in a very real war for the very heart and soul of the country and the world, and we've seen this for some time. Moves and counter moves. If you knew the playbook of your enemy, it means you can always be a step ahead and then use their own operations against them. I believe that this is what we're witnessing here, writes Absolute 1776. I don't know how this will shake out. All I know is an enemy of the US just took a major attack that was severely weakened them. Meanwhile, Israel are the ones bearing the blame and looking like the bad guys while also losing a major nuclear facility. The optics and those who benefited most, it's pretty clear who this favours in the long run, and that would be the United States. The process is never pretty nor easy, just the opposite. Watch out for each other. Keep your heads up. The adversary, Satan, will bring about all of the stops now. Stay prayed up. There you go. So really interesting that people are really thinking about what's going on here. Moves, counter moves. It's not black and white. It is not idealistic, and things will come to the surface. And you can rest assured that all of us who are watching this, who have been in this for all along, we've been the first on the case when it came to Epstein and Pizzagate. 9/11 truth is pretty much how many of us got started in this, when we realised that what we saw was not the truth, and that the bad guys must get taken out whichever way they fall. But within that, to work within the system, to be an infiltrator, which is pretty much what I would consider Trump to have been. People say he's a Freemason or was a Freemason. If he was, he would have been protected, not the opposite, because that's the first rule of Freemasonry, is to protect your own. But he certainly may have been into a few of the meetings and decided, well, this isn't really for me. And so therefore you become an infiltrator. You can say the same thing about Tucker Carlson. He applied to join the CIA, didn't get in, or maybe he did and pretends. But again, an infiltrator just the same way. So you don't know, and you can only judge therefore by actions.
There's a politician I really admire who has a lot of integrity, and that's the European Member of Parliament, Christine Anderson. And her famous line is, cui bono, who benefits from all this? Well, as you just read out, the beneficiary is America, no doubt, right? And this is a way for America to flex its muscles without doing anything. And for a long time, we've been told that America is Israel's bitch. And I always sat there and thought, you've got to be kidding. You've got to be kidding. It's the other way around. Israel is America's bitch, because where's Israel? It's in the Middle East. So America doesn't need to go to the Middle East because it has Israel, right? So much as I distrust everything Benjamin Netanyahu says and does, I think we have to do what Christine Anderson says and ask who benefits. And who benefits here is America. I'm very worried about, despite being very glad that the Democrats didn't win the election, very worried that no matter who's in power in the United States, left, right, deep state, the white hats, whoever, America has essentially become what the British Empire used to be. It is rolling around the world, undertaking coups. Look what happened in Ukraine. And this is left and right. This is all of them, right? If there is a new one world government, I always talk about Brussels and all of this evil that comes out of Europe. Surely it's going to be America. America is running the show. Israel would not have been able to strike Iran without getting the hoy off America. There's absolutely no way. And we know they did because America pulled out all its people beforehand. By the way, Iranian people really like Trump. They've always really liked him. And now they're very upset. They're very upset because they say he should have warned them. My feeling is they should have been warned when America pulled out its people from Iran. And I told my friends to tell their family members to get out. They actually got out today and they moved 3 hours away from Tehran, which is where they were. Their windows came in. They saw the bombs. They heard the bombs. Their windows smashed. Luckily, they were okay. They couldn't move before because a family member had just had surgery. But today they've gone 3 hours from Tehran. Who knows if there's going to be more bombing and shelling. But it's very interesting. I'm telling you now, I have very good instincts. My instincts are telling me that these wars, the real wars, are for data and intelligence that has been acquired with AI far in advance of what we know. We're worried that it's going to cause us to pay more taxation, and that's what they want. They're talking about that at the UN again next week. Carbon taxation, and we can't move left and right, and we're going to end up with 30% of what we earn and all that stuff. Yes, yes, yes. But the most important aspect of this was as a wartime weapon to get information on all of the leaders, on monarchy, everyone. And yes, Jeffrey Epstein was part of that, to control the world. You don't need to control the world with bombs and bullets. That's all very good optically on television, these hot wars. We've been in a Cold War since 2020. Don't tell me we haven't been in a Cold War since 2020. We've all been biologically attacked, financially attacked, psychologically attacked, for crying out loud. They've been trying to get our children to amputate their own genitals. Don't tell me that we're not in a war. It's been disgusting. And now it's going to heat up. I said last week it's going to heat up. They have stuff on each other, stuff that if we, the people of the world, knew, this whole house of cards would come down.
And we have been waiting for the house of cards to fall for 1963, 2001, 2008 GFC, 2016, the election result of Donald Trump, I'll put you all in jail type of thing. And we go on and on and on. And who would have thought that whole lifetimes have come and gone in the process of doing this? But we are closer now than we've ever been. And this, I guess, is the process of what's happening here. Look, General Michael Flynn's been saying some interesting things as well in terms of how his analysis of what's going on, and he's also pointing to Tucker Carlson's increasing opposition to Israel and the fight against Iran. There, Israel's all-out attack on nuclear weapons infrastructure, Flynn writes, and leadership of Iran has created an historic choice. Will Israel be allowed to defeat decisively the existential threat long posed by the tyrannical Iranian regime, both to her people and ours, and thereby usher in an era of potential strategic stability aligned with Western civilization that the Middle East and the free world have rarely known? Or will the US interfere, as it has done consistently in the past, to prevent such a clear-cut victory and thereby ensure that Israel's enemies and ours live to fight another day? The answer is essentially up to President Donald Trump, and how he comes down may depend on whether he is being properly informed of the options and opportunities versus their associated risks. or is he being disserved by those who profess to speak for the America First movement but actually seem to be putting Iran and Qatar first? Fortunately, Trump appears to have, as usual, grasped the central issue in comments on June 14th, responding to Tucker Carlson's criticism of US support for Israel during its attacks in Iran as an anathema for the American First way of doing things. The president said to The Atlantic's Michael Scherer, considering that I'm the one that developed America First, and considering that the term wasn't used until I came along, I think I'm the one that gets to decide that. For those people who say they want peace, you can't have peace if Iran has a nuclear weapon. So for all those wonderful people who don't want to do anything about Iran having a nuclear weapon, that's not peace, he says. So this is the grey area that continues. So we know now that it looks obvious that Trump is allowing Netanyahu to do the work that supports the eradication of the nuclear threat once and for all, which seems to be where it's at, but at the same time wanting peace for all people of all countries around the world, which is why this whole economic restructure thing has been taking place in the first instance. So the idea that there are genuine idealistic good guys and bad guys in war is a fairy tale. I just don't think that that's even possible.
I certainly wouldn't want to help countries become more like our countries, and the troops are on the ground and they go, yay, we're free, we're out from under this regime, and straight behind that come a couple of ambos, and here come your injections. Welcome to the West.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because people live differently and believe differently doesn't mean that your way is the best, right? I thought we were meant to live in a DEI, diverse society and world. Only diverse if they allow you to be diverse. Only beliefs if they allow you to believe. We are, NATO is, we are completely totalitarian to others and to our own people, and it has to stop. You can't keep traipsing around the world waving the freedom flag, and the countries that you are running don't feel free at all, for crying out loud. We haven't been free for 5 years. This has been a cold war. It's disgusting. I would love to be a fly on the wall, by the way, when Anthony Albanese has apparently got his meeting with Trump. If Trump has any cojones about him, he will hold Albanese's feet to the fire. And I don't know how it would work with Australia. I wouldn't want Australia to be exposed to harsh tariffs or anything like that. But surely he can say that what's gone on here, this country was wonderful pre-2020, absolutely wonderful. And I would never have believed that the people of this country would have been treated so badly the way they have.
Yeah, we're not disagreeing there. Well, it'll be interesting, isn't it? So are we looking at Trump as the person who's going to pull the world out of this, or at least set a new direction? Are we going to expose the criminality? And if we are looking to him to do that, and therefore to maybe direct Anthony Albanese that there are certain things that can and can't happen, the one big thing that he has hanging over him is the AUKUS submarine deal, of course. Whether or not America's going to pull out of that or use the threat of pulling out of that, and how Albanese will react to that. You would assume that would be on the table. What's interesting, of course, about AUKUS is that all three leaders that were involved with its creation have all since gone. And not only have they all since gone, all three political parties have gone the other way. So that's also interesting too. So it's a completely different scenario. In Australia, it was ScoMo, Liberal, gone. Albanese, Labor. In the UK, it was Rishi Sunak, Conservative, gone. Now Keir Starmer, Labor. And then you've got Joe Biden, Democrat, now replaced by Trump, Republican. So completely different circumstances there, and we'll see what happens. But
we're living in the past. In Australia and the UK and Canada, we're living in the past. We're living in the mess they created in the Cold War between 2020 and 2025. And Trump is trying to pull America at least forward. And we're not going forward. We're hovering exactly where they want us under a totalitarian regime. You only have to look at things like this e-safety commissioner was wheeled out and, don't dare do your own research and believe your own truth. There is not your own truth, right? There is the truth and there's a lie. And we've been exposed to lies and propaganda. I don't understand why the Australian people weren't protected with certain laws and legislations against being propagandized against, but clearly they were, and they're still being propagandized against. These injections are still being pushed by pharmacists across this country. And there's video evidence of that. So it's nice to know there's absolutely no one in Australia protecting anyone. And then we've got people like Senator Gerard Rennick, who are not senators anymore, and they're still there speaking out. But really, the ones that have got elected, they've gone very quiet, haven't they, Jason? They've not exactly hit the ground running.
Well, of course, it doesn't take place, I think, until the end of this month. The new senators get sworn in, so they're not there yet. And Rennick would be doing his last sort of couple of weeks as a senator. So, yeah, he's made some interesting comments on the Israeli scenario as well with Iran. It's probably worth sharing some of those now. I'll just give you part of that. This one's interesting here. He says, if another war breaks out in the Middle East, Australia better not be dragged into it. Don't be fooled by the lies that Iran is a threat to anyone. It's a pariah state that is surrounded by Sunni countries, and they are closely aligned with the West. The moment it strikes out any of its neighbours, it will be destroyed. The leaders of Iran know that, so they ever do is mouth off insults against Israel. While it's a fair argument to say Iran funds Hezbollah, the Sunni states and Israel fund Hamas. It's an interesting comment there from Rennick. ISIS and Al-Qaeda, proxy wars amongst terrorist groups, are the modus operandi of the intelligence agencies. Israel's preemptive strike was unnecessary and provocative. The fact that it can identify and target nuclear facilities in Iran, yet claim to be totally unaware of what Hamas was up to in Gaza and accordingly flatten all of it in response, shows it's a rogue state. It is also a cowardly state, as it would never be so provocative if it didn't have the protection of the US, where many of its politicians place the interests of Israel higher than their own country. He then says it's a cowardly state, as if it would never be so provocative if you didn't have the protection. There you go. There are many factors at play here: deep state shenanigans, Israel arrogance, and the hatred between Sunnis and Shias. Well, it's unlikely China and Russia will come to Iran's aid if a conflict broke out. It can't be ruled out. If that scenario does ever play out, I fail to see why Australia should be involved. Israel was the creation of the deep state establishment by the Balfour Declaration. Iran was once a democratic country before the CIA, just as it did it in Ukraine overthrew its democratic government. The conflict, like most others in the Middle East, have been created by the deep state establishment. Australia's military should focus on protecting ourselves and staying out of the establishment wars. I have no interest in sending my taxpayer dollars or children into that quagmire. And therefore, that is a line in the sand here. And one would expect that Albanese would fall into that line. But of course, we'll wait and see how that plays out. It would be interesting if Albanese supports Trump, if there was a call for it. But then you've got J.D. Vance coming out at the weekend saying absolutely under no circumstances do we want to send our military in unless it's absolutely imperative to defend ourselves. So you wouldn't expect that the Americans are going to send anyone in, and the same again for in the case here of Australia. So you would think that that would be a line in the sand.
Now, I just need to change tack quickly because I know we're going to move on to some other things. Just in some Australian news from the New South Wales, the government land management code has just been amended in New South Wales. This is horrific. Let me read it to you. The New South Wales government wants to change the rules about managing native vegetation. They've finished a review of the laws and are making some updates. The main things they want to change are strengthen environmental protections to better look after nature and wildlife. I guess they're not considering that with their wind turbines and their solar panels, though. Implement all 13 recommendations from the previous review with a couple of changes. Get feedback from the community, landowners, and other interested people about the proposed changes. The changes will impact how landowners use and manage their land. This could affect people's rights and how they use their property. Increase restrictions on clearing or modifying native vegetation on private land, even if it's necessary for agricultural, residential, or commercial purposes. That's farmers finished. The strengthened environmental protections will override the rights and interests of landowners to manage their own properties as they see fit. Change could lead to a devaluation of the private property if landowners have reduced ability to develop and utilise their own land. New regulations will place financial burdens on landowners, such as requiring expensive surveys, assessments, or mitigation measures. Potential conflicts between private property rights and the government's conservation objectives, leading to disputes and legal challenges, uncertainty among landowners about the future ability to use and control their own land under the amended code. Changes will disproportionately impact regional, rural, and farming communities who rely on the productive use of their land. It never ends. It never ends, right? So you used your own money to buy land, to use to do whatever you want, grow crops, raise animals, build Airbnbs on it, build homes for your children so they can live close and be safe. That's all about to change. Now, the fact that they're changing all these laws and codes and legislations, Nothing is stopping these people. We made a terrible mistake. Australia made a terrible mistake if they did indeed vote Labor back in. And I just hope this is some of the stuff that Trump speaks to Albo about.
Yeah, at a state level, you would hardly think that would be the case, and you might get just a couple of points coming out from Trump into Albo's ears, which would be if it doesn't align with America First values, such as free speech, for example, might be the limit of what we see. But we will wait and see what happens there. Unbelievable, isn't it, to think that again, more controls by government for reasons that are unknown that seem to just support the agenda. What else can we make up to support the agenda of trying to create a depopulation agenda and a famine? And diseases that you need to take our medicine for. Now, a couple of things in the world of health. Dr. Mark Hobart is back in the news. Dr. Hobart was one of the first people that was closed down at his practice when he gave out many, in fact, over 1,000 exemptions to the vaccine. There's a sign on his surgery that says banned patients from entering this surgery because Dr. Mark Hobart refused to surrender your private and confidential patient details. So in other words, the powers that be through AHPRA wanted to get patient records to find out how or who was made exempt from COVID vaccines. He is still in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, still fighting off that particular case. It just so happens.
The blacklist, Jason, the blacklist of the great unvaccinated.
Yes, exactly right. And so that's really what you would think it's really about. So look, that's in the news. That's now published in News Today, which is a big deal. But the point is that he's now fighting that off to be able to get back and serve as a doctor once again. But he's still suspended at this particular stage. In slightly better news, as we mentioned earlier, CDC. RFK has named new slate of vaccine advisors after purging the panel, one of whom is Professor Retsat Levy, who says it's time for science and not ideology. And what's interesting is I interviewed Retsat on my World Series news show, and I think it might be worth just cutting a little bit and showing you some of that now, because I think it might give people confidence that the right people are being appointed by RFK Jr., which would eventually flow on to Australia. Take a look and see what you think.
Conceptually, the big differences here are that unlike the traditional vaccines, here we are deceiving our immune system by teaching our own cells to produce an antigen that is foreign to the body, which means that every cell of our body that will produce that antigen will be considered by our own immune system as something that needs to be destroyed.
Yes.
And now the question is, how do you control the quantity that you produce? And in fact, unlike traditional vaccines, you cannot control the quantities that are being produced. In fact, we can have good estimates that every time we get a shot of the mRNA vaccines, we actually produce trillions of copies of the spike protein, that, by the way, is known now to be the most toxic part of the virus, right? This is the part of the virus that actually caused the severe illness of COVID by generating different processes in the body, including autoimmune reactions. So we are basically creating a mechanism that we don't have very good control of. And essentially, the most important assumption in the safety paradigms of these vaccines was that we have enough control that it will stay in the ejection site for a short period of time and then be cleared from the body, creating the immune response that we want, but in a controlled way. We know now for sure that doesn't happen, or at least there are many cases for many people in which the mRNA, the lipids that surrounding it, and also the spike that the cells are producing are actually staying in the body, spreading across the body beyond the injection site, and even stay in the body for months. We already know, we have evidence that it's staying for at least several months. We don't know when it's cleared, if at all it's cleared. But now we have, if that's true, and that's true, we are in a very different situation where now the process is completely out of control, and different cells spreading around our body in the bloodstream can produce the spike protein be considered as something that our immune system should attack. And that gives rise to a major risk for a range of autoimmune and different side effects that could stem from the fact that our body starts to attack itself. Because the cells of the body that are not supposed to produce foreign antigens are starting to produce foreign antigens because they carry the mRNA code that was injected. In addition to that, the nanolipids themselves, what you put around the mRNA to keep it stable, to allow it to penetrate the cells of the human body, this is by itself could be toxic. So that by itself could also cause mechanisms of harm. And we actually seeing now a range of side effects for these vaccines that is really unprecedented, because almost every system of our body is being affected. We have inflammation of the heart, myocarditis. I will talk about this in just a bit, because that's the recent paper that you just mentioned. We have neurological side effects. We have muscular side effects. We have impacts on the kidneys. We have really a wide range that really fits the concern that this thing is spreading in the entire body. And now it's a matter of where in the specific patient, where it lands in terms of what kind of side effects you might see.
Now, I'll tell you what I'm really angry about. He's right about all that from everything I've seen. I've got friends who are paramedics and friends who are doctors, and they all know. Right? They all know because they're seeing the upshot of all this. And what's happened is somehow, well, they've had it as well, right? They've had these injections, so they're very worried for themselves. They are essentially, particularly the paramedics, they are scooping up and picking up the pieces of all this. But they've essentially been deputized by this criminal cartel who've rolled these injections out to keep their mouths shut because they want to keep their jobs. And even anonymously, they're not whistleblowing. Now, what's happening is some paramedics I know who did lose their job because of mandates, because they wouldn't inject this crap, they're still in contact with working paramedics. And so the information is coming through them, a bit like information coming through police officers who aren't with VicPol anymore from their friends who are still in VicPol. So doctors and paramedics across Australia know of the harms that have been done. They're picking up children off the side of the road or at school that have had heart attacks, myocarditis, pericarditis. Ambulances in Australia now don't even bother with the sirens. We have lights. It used to be lights and sirens, you know. All through the pandemic, I used to video the sound near my house, constant lights and sirens to frighten you. Now all the ambulances around Victoria, they have the flashing lights, but they don't use the sirens, because they don't want to alert us to the fact that it's all falling apart. And this was a piece of information that came to me from a no longer serving paramedic, that came to her from a still serving paramedic. Someone has told them to turn the sirens off so that you don't realize how much harm has been done here.
Shocking, isn't it? Absolutely shocking. But at the same time, that interview with Recep Levy was August 10, 2023. So almost 2 years later, he's now on a powerful board in direction, therefore, of what's going to happen in terms of the immunisation schedule. So if you've got people,
you
like
can hold him to those things he said, Jason. You've got that. Don't ever delete that.
No, well, there you go. But once again, isn't it interesting that the mainstream news didn't interview Professor Recep Levy? He's got, thousands of followers on X, gets huge scope. That interview did very well when we shared it at the time, even on Facebook. I think it got maybe 100,000 views or something like that, so it did quite well. But that's the point, that we really have a role to play, like we set out at the beginning of the show, to explain that we need the support of our viewers, because this is the whole thing, from a grassroots movement to be able to reach out to people that have now been appointed by RFK Jr., who effectively is in the top 5 in the Trump administration, the only administration in the world that's literally got the power to do something about it, and he's doing it. And there we are, little old you and me in this process, putting together these shows, and we've actually spoken to these people, and he's presenting information that is crucial. So, I mean, who would you want to have in that position? I think I want Recep Levy there. I want that man to be involved. He knows what's going on. He's the only one that I want anyone who's telling the truth. Look, I'll tell you,
this, it's deliberate what's happening to us in this show. Of
Mm-hmm.
course it is, which means we're effective. So they try and stop you when you're effective. So at least we know we're effective. So what's happening is I've got 275,000 followers on X, 275,000 people, right? That is more than 3 times the fill up in the MCG. Imagine 3.5 MCGs. That's how many followers I've got. And when it comes to retweets on our show on a daily basis on X, I can't get above 10. And what happens then is I'll do other things where it's just me chatting in one of my videos, or, I could put up a picture of my dog and it goes viral. And then people go, oh, where have you been? I haven't seen you for ages. And it's like, dude, I do this show every single day, but they are making sure whoever they are, and we know who they are in Australia, they are making sure that no one sees it. Instead, they see the dross on the mainstream media that are now proven liars and propagandists. And I feel very sorry for Australians. They can't even make their own choice. They're not presented with alternative choice. We call ourselves alternative media, independent media. Nobody knows that. Nobody sees that. So I would advise anyone who watches this show, who's a fan of this show, get the link from our posts and post it over and over and over and over and over again underneath the posts of Australian politicians, because then there's nowhere for them to run, right? They put their stuff out there so that they look like great bureaucrats. They're not, right? See how they react if you put this show under their posts.
Yeah, good idea. Well, the alternative is we can just do this or this.
Do you want us to let's ask the audience. Do you want us to stop doing the show? Would life change at all if we just said, oh, we can't fight the system. We can't fight the AI bitch that's censoring us and shadow banning us. Obviously, Australians don't want to see us. It's ridiculous. I've got people talking to me from production companies who are setting up big studios because they know that there's a massive vacuum in Australian society for real news, to go on digital stations for people to hear the truth, or at least just honest, transparent people discussing their opinions on what's going on. You got to ask yourself why people aren't allowed to discuss their opinions, talking of which I won't name them. But there are a couple of people who were instrumental in documenting with documentary films the lockdowns and stuff in Melbourne. And they're losing followers and fans. They're becoming very unpopular because they've taken a really strong stance that they're siding with Israel over Iran. And it's like, what's going on that you would take such a strong stance and then sort of not discuss options, right? And it's not going very well. I mean, so many people who've been involved in the freedom movement. Where were we? We were on Club Grubbery, and I think it was Hoodie that said, this space could do with a few of them being removed, to be honest, disappearing. People are raising money dishonestly and then not telling the people who gave them money where it's going. There are people that are taking sides and becoming warmongers. And I always say, Jason, give people enough rope and they hang themselves. You don't need to do anything.
Well, very, very true. And this is part of the art of war is, don't interfere with an enemy that's destroying itself. At the same time, appear strong when you are weak, appear weak when you are strong. The use of a mirror, as we've just read earlier in the show. And it's all about optics. Perception is reality. What you think you see is what you believe, or what you want to believe is what you believe, etc. So it's incredibly, incredibly confusing. But at the same time, there is no, limit to the exposures that go on before you seem to get results. We haven't even talked about the rallies and protests at the weekend in the US, and perhaps we'll look at developments over the coming days as to what's happened there. But it was there's two different arguments being presented: protests, rallies all over the country. You don't see necessarily on mainstream news the same as what you see on social media. There were some horrific things recorded, violence used used against people, people with these masks and the Palestinian / Iraqi kafir over their faces and hiding, etc., and then flashing in people's cameras of journalists, flashing lights so that they can't record the assault taking place behind the person flashing the lights. I saw one of those.
No way.
Yeah, just horrific. I saw Tommy Robinson share an horrific video in the UK of somebody being literally hit by a car. Looks like they were killed by this particular car, and people getting out and watching what's going on. And he just says the comment, another day in the UK. I mean, it is so horrific what we're seeing. You wonder how we got, well, not how we got to this stage, or how we get out of this stage, and how we can possibly find, unity amongst society when you've got, one part just saying, well, look, that there's a big problem, we want to fix it, and the other one saying, no, the problem is these people and wealthy people, and we've got to take because that's how it works. And then you've got other people within, ethnic groups criticizing their own and saying we are to blame here. We have, bad attitude, bad culture, etc. So, I guess it starts from within, looking within yourself to realize what you can do differently. I'm always surprised that even here on social media, for the years that you put on, bucking the system, going against it from the point of view of pointing out through fact after fact after fact of what's going on, and then extrapolating from that. And you say one thing wrong, and some anonymous supporter without a photograph or a real name says, "That's it, I'm out, I'm not following you anymore." Like, really? So this is just a kindergarten for supporting, biases. I don't understand that either. I don't know why people are consuming this information, ad nauseum.
You know what I say to them, Jason? When they say to you, "I'm not following you anymore," I always say to them, "This isn't an airport lounge. You don't need to announce your departure."
Yeah, nice. Very nice. And yeah, so I don't get that. I don't get that either. But at the same time, the lack of contribution. Not everyone can make the contribution, but I don't understand the consumption that people are consuming so much information, and as soon as they get something that they don't like, they're out and they go and follow some other thing. It's like a fair weather follower. Again, it's just interesting. What is the debate? What do you want to see? I guess. I've always been in the scenario. I knew that what we were going into was going to be bad, and it was going to get worse and worse, and it spirals until you finally crack it, and it goes back the other way, and you get out of it. But what I never understood was why no one was talking about what we want after the fact that the system has collapsed and we get out on the other side. What do we actually want for ourselves? And if so, why aren't we leading that by example? And what are we doing to prepare for that? What is the new world? Is there going to be a new world? And look, the more this goes on and you have these pessimistic moments, that you start thinking that we're never going to get out of it. And if we do, there's nothing on the other side either. I mean, what a horrible way to live, to think that this is just a downward spiral, and that the only thing that sells is more bad news and more hatred of people or races or ideas or something like that. I mean, wouldn't we all just want to have...
They're just turning us on each other, Jason. That's what they want. And I'm disappointed that people fall for it. There's so much aggression and so much call for violence on social media. I said a little post about it yesterday, and people were like, "Oh, now it's going in the other direction. You don't like it." It's nothing to do with that. I don't agree with the bombing of anybody. I understand that governments are nervous about what people keep in their data centers. Yeah, I get that. That was the first bit of glimmer of truth I saw, and I thought, oh, that makes sense. That makes way more sense than nuclear weapons to me. But the fact that you've got hordes and hordes of people on social media who've been baited into this, probably by AI. I mean, if AI had been programmed on, or told the humans, oh, this is how you make them all turn on each other. It's like West Side Story. It's gangs. It's pick a side. And that's what's happening. And I don't like to pick a side. I like to hold everyone to account. I like to look at everyone's information. I like to look at the evidence of what people like Benjamin Netanyahu have said in the past, what people like Trump have said in the past, what people like Biden have said in the past. I mean, God, look at our leaders. Look at Keir Starmer. Look at Anthony Albanese. Joe Biden saying we've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin. What do you mean you've been patient? You're not a slave master. Piss off. And what about Dan Andrews? He said some creepy stuff in the pandemic. He said, if you don't get these injections, you're going to be left behind. I remember that was the creepiest thing I heard. And I thought, what do you mean? Left behind in what exactly? So you've got to keep an open mind. I like to think we have an open mind on this show. I know we disagree about lots of things. Look, I want to see the best in everyone. I want to see the best outcomes for everyone. And that's why it was really important for me to listen to my Iranian friends who said they love Trump. They were disappointed that they didn't know about the strikes. And I said, well, maybe not letting you know about the strikes was pulling Americans out of Iran, right? Maybe that's the time you should have sat up and listened. But it's really important to keep looking at everything that's coming in, because guaranteed, good guys and bad guys, they control what they want us to know, Jason. It's that old adage, we're on a need to know basis. And quite frankly, they've deemed it, we don't need to know. The problem is we want to know. And I think we have a right to know.
Well said. Well, on that is our mission statement, isn't it? Is to be able to present information that you can't get, certainly not in the mainstream, but also present it in a way that we can, civilly debate issues. And we tend to arrive at the same point, which is that we're looking for peace, unity, and an expansion for all of us, all of the little people on earth that are the real power behind all of this. And what I really want to see, like all of us, is that we want to get to the bottom of it. We want to get justice. We want to get real information, and we want to know that there's got to be something else. And for mine, I just feel like that we have been held back for so long, not just by this, but so many other ways. And we are destined to, we need to find new ideas, new technology. Admittedly, AI not necessarily the way we want to go, but there's so much more available. We're not going to stop inventing things. So, we've got to keep going and going and going. This is what we're here for. This is our ability. This is what sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. Whether or not there is another animal kingdom out there beyond what we know, who knows? I just feel like we are desperate for some happy, good news. And there's just so much grief, torture, and unknown. And even here in Australia over the weekend, I mean, the Nationals have announced that they're abandoning net zero. Meanwhile, you've got Susan Lee, who is supporting Albanese. And people are asking, and I asked the question, Susan, why don't you go and join a coalition with Labor and let the Nationals join a coalition with the third party movement, and then let's see what happens. Because, pro net zero and against net zero, that is the real line in the sand. One means it's going to be more expensive, less reliable, to serve a purpose that's irrelevant, because whilst this whole carbon dioxide nonsense, 432 parts per million, and we're nothing of nowhere, let's work on something else. So, at least there was an inkling of hope within the National Party that there's a move in the right direction. What I hope, though, is that people don't go, oh, well, but they did this badly, so therefore, we abandon them and we go and shout at the clouds and join some minority movement that goes nowhere. There has to be consolidation. We've argued that for so long. Consolidation, building, whatever. And politics, it's a 51-49 game. There's only left or right, up or down, right or wrong, whatever it is. But it's playing on an issue one at a time, and it's hard going. But we will continue to try and do that work, both on the news and in the political spectrum. And this great big clash of ideas, we need some good ones. We need them fast.
Well, there's only truth and lies. That's, forget whether it's politics or humanity or wars, there's only truth and lies. And it's nice to know that the Liberal Party have outed themselves. As I say, give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves. And they're now aligning with Anthony Albanese and Labour when it comes to net zero policies. So that means that the Liberals are on board with a lie. Now, these elites, they write about it in books. They say that evil men have always been behind great leaps forward in human history, evil men and collateral damage. That's what they believe. So they believe that we're all collateral damage because they're doing this great reset, this great leap forward. But they're not reinventing the wheel here. They haven't. They think they have. They think they've reinvented energy into green energy because they didn't own the other energy companies, right? Countries like Iran control the oil. Countries like Iraq controlled the oil. So what do you come up with? Green energy based on a lie. You haven't exactly reinvented the wheel. And by the way, for the record, it's an absolute fact that the United States of America has breached every treaty it has ever signed, right? So when you're looking at the World Health Organization Amendment to Treaty, this, that, and the other, I don't yet know about Australia, but these big countries break every treaty ever signed. And we know for a fact they broke the Biological and Chemical Weapons Research and Manufacture Treaty. So They all need to be held to account. We will keep holding them to account on this show. So thank you so much for watching the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and Jason Olbourne. You can bet your bottom dollar we're doing this all over again tomorrow.